Hello, everyone. My name is Antonio. I'm in representation of BURO HAPPOLD Engineering, which is an international engineering firm based in London. Before I start, I really want to thank the Turkish Design Council for getting us involved in this amazing project. As it has been said, we've been involved for the last 3 weeks on the project. We joined the site visit to Antakya 3 weeks ago, and we've been reviewing information and having workshops with the different design teams in the last 2 weeks. And we've seen that this project is not only incredibly important, but also the methodology that has been put forward in terms of collaboration between different local international architects to get the best results is incredible. So thank you very much for getting us involved. And also, we've only been working on this for 2 weeks, so what we're showing here is preliminary results and work in progress, and we will hopefully we'll be able to present a lot more in the next few weeks. So before we move forward, I would like to explain more or less what we do, because we're going to see a lot of architectural renderings and architectural proposals this evening, but we are an engineering firm, and what we do is what we call integrated urban development plans, which from our city's strategies department, we take all the technical inputs from the disciplines within BURO HAPPOLD, and we integrate them into a strategy, urban development strategy. And we do that in order to ensure that the development strategies, they integrate resiliency and sustainability principles from the start. So it's not something that is done ad hoc, but from the start. And I think this is very much in line with the philosophy that the previous speakers have mentioned in the methodology put forward for this project. So for this particular project, we are looking into the earthquake resilient engineering and emergency planning, trying to review the current master plan and review the current proposals to ensure that they do integrate the best practice principles in earthquake resilience engineering. Also, ensuring that the climate adaptation and sustainability principles are ingrained within the master plans and the urban development strategies. And I think that is a really important point, because the climate is going to change, and that's something that we can't really stop, regardless whether we want it or not. And the temperatures are going to rise. Antakya, whether we like it or not, is going to face rising temperatures. It's going to face shorter, so less water rainfall per year, and those things cannot be stopped, but they can be mitigated through a good integration of sustainable urban development principles early in the design process. And hopefully we are still at the start, so we will have time to really review what's being put forward and ensure that they do respond to climate change. Critical, obviously, within an architecture firm, critical for all this integration is the sustainable infrastructure, enabling or reduce the consumption of resources through a sustainable infrastructure systems is absolutely critical to deliver sustainability. And finally, and this is probably less attached to an engineering firm, is the strategic planning and urban economics. But it is a crucial aspect of the integrated the urban development plans that we do, because we are definitely going to be building for the people that have been displaced by the earthquake, but we should not forget that this is a city also for future generations, and understanding what the demographics projections of those generations and what the economy is going to be like in the next few decades is absolutely critical to inform the plan, because we need to know what are we building for in the next 2 decades, how much are we building, who are we building for. And in order to do that, we need to do some forecasting in terms of what kind of economy is likely to hold and stick in this area, what kind of demographic shifts are we going to be facing in the next decades, and more critical, how does that inform your sustainable planning, or sustainable infrastructure planning. Your demands will need to be built, or your infrastructure is going to have to be planned based on the population that you think you're going to be attracting. So with all these elements, we will have input into the master plan design to ensure that those are addressed. Before I move forward very quickly, this is a good example of a BURO HAPPOLD project. It's not the most recent, but it does illustrate how powerful the integrated the integrated development plans are. This is Wadi Hanifa, a project in Riyadh that Bureau HAPPOLD led, and it was from the start a revitalization project along the Wadi Hanifa, which is the main wadi crossing Riyadh, and culturally and ecologically an incredible asset, historical asset for the city that was completely in decline, and people weren't using it, and the areas around it were actually not doing really well. So when we came into the project, we realized that people weren't going to this area because the river was actually quite contaminated and it wasn't flowing properly. So after we put forward a few options, we decided that to restore the wadi to its environmental condition, which was to serve as a natural filtration system for the city. And by doing that, that became the main driver of revitalization of the whole area, because not only it allowed more flow of the water, but also it cleaned. It became again a source of natural filtration system, and through then putting some urban design projects along the wadi, it has now become one of the major places to go and enjoy the urban realm that Riyadh really lacks. So I think what this illustrates is that a technical input into a project can actually have a tremendous impact in the environment, but also in the socio-economic performance of the city, because this now is is an area of the city where land value is one of the highest, and it is because of this regeneration project that was led and driven by a technical decision. So if we now move to our involvement in this project. As I said, we've been involved for 3 weeks, and one thing that was really striking is that this project faces two tensions. One is to build quickly, because there is an absolute urgency to relocate the people that have been living in container housing for way too long. So there is an urgency to really build as fast as possible for those people. And at the same time, as I said at the beginning of the presentation, there is another urgency to really take it slow and plan for future generations, ensuring that this is a truly resilient master plan and embraces some sustainability principles from the start. And obviously, the two are not always easy to merge. So, as again, we need to be building for the current needs, but also building for the future needs. And I think that is the tension that that comes again and again in this project, and we need to deal with. And I think, existing needs for the future needs. And I think that has led to a project that runs at 2 speeds and 3 scales. The first one is the pilot project, and this one is about the most urgent one, the most immediate is about relocation of the people. And, it's to relocate the people into a city that is familiar, safe, and improved from what it was before. But at the same time, in parallel, we also need to work on the second scale, which is the reconstruction plan for the city for the full city of Antakya, and that runs in parallel. And we do have a little bit more time, not that much, but a little bit more time to really set up the principles for reconstruction and do a strategy or a framework that will guide this reconstruction into sustainable and resilient outcomes. And finally, we have the third scale, which the previous presenter has alluded to, which is the regional. The reconstruction strategy for the region of Hatay, and how do we use that opportunity to revitalize the region. And obviously these 3 scales speak to each other and they influence each other, so we need to work at these 2 speeds and 3 scales. I'm now going to move on to the work that we've done so far, which is mainly focused on what we think is more immediate, talking about the urgent pilot project and what is more urgent, which is the engineering principles, and ensuring that every single design proposal that is put forward embraces those principles, because whether we like it or not, Hatay is located in an area that is very likely going to face new environmental disasters in the future, hopefully not the near future. So building based on engineering or influencing the master plan so it really integrates those principles is absolutely crucial. Hence why we've started and prioritized this point. So I think we all know that the earthquake hit Hatay and it was in the epicenter zone. So even if the epicenter was further up, the strength of the earthquake was as if it was within the epicenter, and Hatay is within the faults. So again, the level of risk that Antakya is facing is tremendous. So you can see here that the likelihood for landslides, liquefaction, estimated population at risk is very extensive. So this needs to be taken into account. I mean, it is an area of high risk, and integrating those principles is essential. We've done some analysis in terms of the landslide level of risk in Antakya. Obviously, all the old part of the city south of the river, right under the main cliff, is at most risk, and that needs to be taken into account. And also liquefaction map, which is affecting most of the river, but also in the epicenter. And I think this also explains the level of destruction north of on the top part of the river. We still need to review microsonation analysis, which is absolutely crucial to start planning for this, because depending on the earth quality at the micro zones, that will inform where you put your main assets. So you obviously want to avoid putting them in areas of where the soil is damaged. So managing urban earthquake impact risk, do we have direct and indirect effects? The direct effects, I mean, and I want to apologize if this is very clear, I mean, and very obvious for some people, but I think it is very important that we do summarize those so everyone can really refer to those and integrate them. And of course, we will go into more detail as we move along. But regular, simpler rectangular blocks work better in terms of building for resiliency. So I know that that might be a bit deceiving for some of the architecture firms that want to do something a bit more interesting, but if we are in an area of like high earthquake risk, we need to be designing simple structures. Shear walls are reliable systems, and separation between buildings is crucial to avoid pounding. So, moving next to it, one building moving at a different speed to the next one and actually affecting the next one. But that distance between buildings is only at 2% of its height, so it's minimum. So we need to take into account, but it doesn't need to be a big distance. So there is no reason for big distance, only enough so they don't affect each other in case of earthquake. Obviously, following current codes and implementing them, and then try to review like the current methods of construction that might not be suitable for an earthquake area like this one. And I think the interesting ones as well that need to be included and sometimes are forgotten are the indirect effects, which is often after an earthquake you might have a fire that is created. If there is a gas system, it's very likely that that some of the buildings that were probably standing, they are all engulfed in flames. So when we talk about earthquake resiliency, it's also about fire resiliency. And that needs to be included into the codes and into the way we build, we plan and we build our buildings. That means segregated fire risk through the boulevards, so between the blocks, and then really calculating your water supply for fire response at the block level. So where you place your fire risk. Then there is also flooding after earthquakes because of the damaging of the earth near water. So it is important to, apart from damaged dikes or the infrastructure, there is also like the effects on soil that could lead to future, potentially not immediate, but future increased risk of flooding. So redundancy and robustness of access and evacuation routes, I think all that is quite evident, but it is very important that we don't forget it. Like, people think that it's very obvious when they see it on the screen, but in other cases it has been forgotten. So key evacuations and key access routes to key assets is absolutely fundamental, and designing those to sustain a very heavy earthquake is imperative. So in here we've reviewed the current master plan, and we've put some notes that will be reviewed in the future weeks and can be shared with the rest of the teams. But so in terms of like how to build an L-shaped building is less resistant to earthquakes than a block. And the block normally, the international standards is 1 to 3 with block. That's so the ratio. That is the one that sustains the earthquakes better. And the separation of the earthquakes is what I mentioned is a 2% of its height. So it doesn't need to be a big separation between buildings, but they do need to be isolated from one another. The basements actually can be used as a way of reducing vulnerability and as a ground mitigation measure. So in areas of like high liquefaction, so where the earth is actually very soft and muddy or full of water, where it's actually really hard to build. One strategy could be to not build on those areas that are very damaged, but another one could be to do a ground investigation and actually propose some mitigation initiatives, like building a basement, and that basement serves as a structural hold for the buildings above. So while we do need to do the analysis on the quality of soil, it doesn't mean that there are soils where you cannot build. It means that you need to take the adequate mitigation measures before you build. So there is a proposition of a 5-story building height limit, but that is not because of earthquake resilient measures. Actually, a variety of heights is better, because we don't know what kind of earthquake we're going to get next, and depending on the frequency of the earthquake, it might affect what some buildings and not others. So if you create all of them at 5-story heights, if the frequency is 5 stories, then it will affect all of them, right? So if you have like different heights of buildings, it is very likely that it will affect some but not others. So you're building resiliency by varying in height. So this proposition of 5 stories, it might be for aesthetic reasons, but it is definitely not from a earthquake resilient perspective. And the building separation is essential to avoid ponding, but we don't. So we want to have like a 2% of the building height, and for between buildings, between the blocks, we need a 12 meters minimum for fire safety. So every time we want to isolate the building risk of a block, we need a 12-meter separation as a minimum. And ideally, that boulevard includes trees, which also serve as fire mitigation measures. So there is also there needs to be a clear map of the liquefaction and landslide and amplification that we need to review in order to understand what assets go where, especially like the critical assets such as hospitals, schools, and their access. Ideally, we will avoid areas of like high liquefaction. So doing like a microzonation study is critical at this point, and we would like to. I think there is one done. We would like to review it as soon as possible to inform the master plan. I think so. Also, spreading along the riverbanks. This is what we mentioned. After earthquakes, the land next to the rivers are very likely affected. So that doesn't mean that you can't build on those areas and you need to leave them as a park or as a buffer. You can actually use it if you need to for density purposes, for example. But you do need to put some mitigation measures, appropriate mitigation measures in place. And again, I think I cannot emphasize enough the really building redundancy on your access and your critical infrastructure. So like, how many hospitals, like if you have a ratio of like, okay, every certain amount of people will build a hospital, maybe you need to like increase or reduce the number of people per hospital, just because if one is affected, then you won't have one operational in case of a disaster. So having 2 hospitals spread out and with different accesses is really important, and that applies for the areas for secure assembly in terms of a disaster. Those also need to be carefully planned, and along with redundancy in your infrastructure overall. So this is a bit of like a review of some of the buildings that were there before and some of the master plans. So closed space buildings that will create pounding, and that will really influence whether buildings collapse or not. So it's not advised. On reinforced masonry, obviously, I think is quite evident, but a lot of the buildings are still made that way, so they need to be, ideally they will be, if they're more than 2 stories, they will have to be reviewed structurally. An irregular T, L, or O plan shapes, courtyards, can be problematic if the buildings are not, if those shapes are not separated into blocks separated by the 2% of its height. Heavy tilted roof are also not the best design option, and overheads and setbacks. I know that culturally there is a lot of that in Turkish architecture, but those are not the best way of building. And if we do eventually go into that route, they do need to be carefully monitored. Well, a bit of next steps on what to do with earthquake resilience. So is about identifying the zones of unacceptable risk and avoiding building critical infrastructure in those areas. So this is the steps that we're going to take in the next few months. This is the required information that we will share with everyone that we need to review to continue our analysis. And finally, I think some key considerations with the current master plan. So the first one is the density. I think I'm talking about the pilot project where the people are going to be relocated. At the moment, because of some of the rules of maximum 5 stories, and also one that talks about a 50-50 ratio, so only developing 50% of the plot, we are not currently able to house everyone that used to live, or there is potentially some problems in reaching the capacity to house everyone that used to live there. But these decisions are not based on earthquake resiliency principles. So we could, from that perspective, we could increase the density of the blocks. So, for example, both images are from DB Architects Master Plan. The one on the left is actually a lot denser and it varies in heights, and I think it works a lot better in terms of like earthquake resiliency. Whereas what the plan on the left, which is from the same master plan, indicates is a big courtyard and buildings that in L shape that might be problematic and potentially not enough density or potentially an opportunity to increase density. The next one is on the master plan. We saw that there was a huge area, and this also relates to density. There is a huge area next to the river where the liquefaction map shows that there is potentially more problems in terms of the conditions of the grounds for building, and that has been left as a new park for the city. And while I think the city does need parks and needs recreational spaces, I think there are opportunities for developing in there if the appropriate mitigation measures are put in place, which will help with the density. So if we took if we developed there and we increase the density, perhaps we will be able to not only house everyone but potentially even have a surplus in terms of units in the city center, which is obviously the area where you normally want to concentrate your density, ideally. The next one is we've seen a really good analysis on all the rivers and ecological corridors that cross our site and meet the river, and I think those are we need to be really careful because those are potentially flood, maybe like at risk of flooding. But just leaving space without doing the proper analysis might be also a lost opportunity in building density. I think it is important that a proper floor analysis is done, the risk is analyzed, and then measures to mitigate that risk are put in place that also allow potentially a higher density along those edges. And I'm not saying that because of the problem that I mentioned before in terms of like the relocation and potentially having a surplus in terms of units, but also this might become a severance between the city. It's dividing the city in two, so of course you can put like bridges and crossings, but it will be. I'll probably be a bit careful about how we use and how we treat those ecological corridors. And then finally, the adequate climate mitigation measures. As I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, Antakya will become hotter, especially during the summer. So if we're going to be designing for a place that provides high quality public space, which is what we aspire to do, we do need to consider how we mitigate the solar exposure and the microclimate and how you feel in that space during the summer. And those things are also part of the strategies that need to be done early on, so they can be put in place and increase and improve the quality of the public space and the quality of the buildings, and create more resilient for climate change. So we've covered earthquake resilience. The next steps will be to move on with the forecast of employment per economic sector and demographics, and how that influences the master plan. Obviously, we will need to be designing the master plan of Antakya for the demographics and economy that we are projecting. Also, sustainable infrastructure. How do we look for opportunities to include those more sustainable infrastructure in terms of energy and in terms of surface water management into the master plan early? And finally, climate adaptation and sustainability, building those principles early on. So those are the things that we are currently working on, but we weren't able to include in this presentation yet. But hopefully we will in the next one. Thank you.